Okay, in this video we're going to be honing in on some key supply side factors, looking at how participation rates, productivity growth and oil prices can all influence aggregate supply and therefore economic growth. So starting with higher participation, there has been a significant increase in the labour force participation rate in recent years. It's a good thing. It means that a larger majority of those over 15 years of age are choosing to partake in the workforce. We'll learn a little bit more about what participation rates mean in Chapter 6, but basically it means more people are looking to work or working. It's a positive supply side factor. It's something that can be linked to both increasing the quantity and the quality of our resources, and essentially it's good for our aggregate supply potential. So that's not how I wanted to do that. This graph shows the participation rate. So as you can see, it's climbed from around 64% up to around 65.5% over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. But it's definitely growing. You don't need to know the exact amount it's grown to, but it's definitely a positive supply side factor. This represents the percentage of people that are over 15. They're either working or looking for work. So 65% of people are either working or looking for work. This figure here, which as you can see is slightly lower, is the amount of people that are working as a percentage of everyone over 15. So the reason the green is higher than the orange is that the green also includes people who are looking for work as a percentage. But again, we'll discuss that more in Chapter 6. So the percentage of labour supplies as a percentage of the labour available is essentially your participation rate. Now the key things at this point in time is you know why they're good for aggregate supply. So a higher participation rate means more people are looking for work. You want to link that to the fact that there's more competition for jobs. There's more people looking for work, and that puts downward pressure on labour costs, and because there's more supply, so think of it as the supply of labour shifting to the right, and also encourages increased productivity because now there's more competition for jobs. People feel they have to work harder to keep their jobs. So both of those things you want to link to in your answer. Lower labour costs, lower wages, and also increased productivity. Both of those two things, as you know from your real unit labour cost equation, both lower wages and increased productivity help to reduce firms' real unit labour costs, which then leads to lower cost of production for firms. And when you're linking it to growth, you can talk about willingness to supply, reduce prices, increase international competitiveness, expansion in demand. Exactly the same as all the other supply side factors. So your key things that are different here is you can define the participation rates, measure the percentage of the people over 15 that are part of the labour force. The reasons why it's good for supply is that it increases competition, it decreases wage pressures, and that increases productivity as well because there's more competition. That keeps cost of production down, and then it's the same. Willingness to supply increases, lower prices, increased international competitiveness, more demand, more jobs. Explain how labour force participation may have influenced the rate of economic growth and inflation in Australia since 2017. So you're linking it to two goals here. Identify what's happening in the chart, so participation rates have increased. Explain that an increase in labour force participation means there's an increase in the supply of labour, and that's likely to put downward pressure on labour and increase productivity and therefore increase supply. Make the link between an increase in aggregate supply and improvements in growth because we're more willing to supply and international competitiveness. Okay, talk about those two links in detail for growth. It's one you do with every positive supply side factor. And then you can make it clear that the increasing supply of labour also reduces firms' cost of production and helps to reduce inflationary pressures as well. So the lower wages in combination with increased productivity are also both good for reducing prices. They're the key links you want to make in that question. Next one is productivity. Productivity is really important. It's probably the most important thing that impacts our future growth rates. So as we've talked about in the past, productivity measures the level of output per unit of input. And another way to define it is how efficiently we're using our resources to produce goods and services. Labour productivity is looking at the total of output per unit of work hour, so per labour hour. Higher productivity basically means that we're generating more output with the same or fewer resources. So more output per unit of input. Be mindful that increased productivity does not mean we're working longer hours. It means we're getting more output per unit of input or per hour. It helps to lower firms' production costs because if we're more productive, as you know, reduces firms' real unit labour costs. That increases firms' willingness to supply, and then it becomes competitive to all the other questions again. You can link it to demand because there's lower production costs, which reduces inflation, boosts international competitiveness, boosts net exports, and creates jobs. So it shifts the supply curve to the right and expands demand. It's only a supply side factor, but it has a positive impact on demand through the lower prices. As you can see, in recent times, productivity growth in Australia has slowed. It's not negative, If this figure was below 100, that would show the productivity is getting worse, but productivity growth is slow. Really important that you use that language. Productivity growth is slow. So here's a potential question you might get on productivity at the moment. So define productivity and explain how movements in productivity since the beginning of 2018 may impact economic growth and living standards. So you can see in this question, you can see where your marks are coming from. 1 mark for defining productivity, 1 mark for and then explaining what the trend has been, 2 marks for linking that to growth, and then 1 mark for linking how productivity impacts living standards. So, first mark, productivity refers to how efficiently an economy uses resources to produce goods and services. Higher productivity means more output per unit of input. Productivity growth has slowed since the beginning of 2018, which can have negative impacts on both demand and supply. Lower productivity growth can lead to higher per unit costs or average costs for businesses, increasing firms' real unit labour costs. Again, link it as much as you can to real unit labour costs. That increases costs of production. And then the rest of your answer is the opposite to what we've been doing recently with favourable supply side factors. This increased firms' cost of production, makes them less willing to supply, increases prices, makes us less internationally competitive, which reduces demand, employment, income. And because that reduces employment, you can make a link to living standards there. So the decrease in employment opportunities, because our prices are too high, reduces people's living standards because they have less access to goods and services. And you could also mention that the higher prices, as a result of reduced productivity, also reduce our purchasing power. So with the living standards part, you can make links to both more job losses and the fact that prices are higher. So productivity and living standards, just really quickly, we talked about it then. Basically, it's really important that Australia is productive at the moment, and that stems a lot from the fact that the mining boom is over. So there's a lot of pressure on us to be more productive now because we can't rely on extravagant demand from other countries. We can't rely on our commodities sort of saving the economy. We need to be productive so that we can keep jobs in other industries, or we're going to go belly up. So in terms of living standards, it boosts purchasing power, creates employment. You could argue that it leads to more leisure time, but as a negative, you could link to the fact that it can cause more stress. I'm not going to go through that question. It's a very similar question about how lower productivity can hurt living standards. Outline the relationship between productivity growth and sustainable economic growth. Productivity growth is essential for sustainable economic growth. Productivity growth allows a country to boost its productive capacity, so its maximum level of output, which leads to strong growth alongside low inflation. That's why supply side factors are so important. They lead to growth and less inflationary pressures. And without significant increases in productivity, firms can experience bottlenecks or capacity constraints, which can limit economic activity. Last one, oil prices. Basically, at the moment, oil prices are getting higher, so it would be the opposite to this. But if oil prices are lower, that can be good for supply, because we know we use oil in production. That reduces firms' production costs for transportation, manufacturing, makes them more willing and able to supply, and results in an increase in aggregate supply, which helps achieve non-inflationary growth. From an aggregate demand perspective, a reduction in the price of oil means that households have higher discretionary incomes because they're spending less on petrol, and with that extra cash they can buy more goods and services. Okay, there's just a rule of thumb here that as 10 cents a litre off the price of petrol had a similar impact to a 0.25 percentage point in interest rates. So what that's saying is if petrol prices go down by around 10 cents a litre, that's the same essentially as interest rates going down by 0.25%. In recent times, this slide's a little bit old. Recent times, prices have started to increase, oil prices. We'll talk about climatic conditions in the next video.